So another section of the book, and again, I know you could write a whole book on this in itself, is neurodivergence. And I wouldn't want to do this chat without talking about it, because it seems like we're in a time of change where people... It's such a strange, contradictory thing. There's more people being diagnosed with ADHD, but we're equally told there are so many people out there who haven't been diagnosed that should be. So we're going, wait, what? And actually what you're saying, well, I'll let you say what you think about neurodivergence, because again, it's probably more to do with the environment we're growing up in, the experiences that we're dealing with. And also we can't look at neurodivergence without looking at the, again, controversial system in place that allows us to ascertain whether someone is neurodivergent or not. And that is a questionnaire. There's no scientific brain scanning way to say your brain is wired differently. It's a questionnaire that we're filling out and going, your kid's got ADHD, ASD, whatever it might be. So how do we navigate this big old ball of info?
Oh, right. Okay. Settling in. How long have we got?
I love it.
Where to begin? Okay. Well, we've got neuroscientists like Jaak Panksepp, who 20 years ago said that children really weren't having ADHD. They just weren't playing enough. So we're looking at Sir Ken Robinson, a great in education, sort of said children weren't suffering. They were suffering from childhood, basically. And what they were really both meaning is that if our children are not able to do the things, again, if we reflect on the context of how our children are growing up, more sedentary, eating more processed foods, all of these things are actually impacting stress in motherhood, stress in pregnancy rather, and in motherhood, but stress in pregnancy. There's a lot that I talk about in the book that really, when you look at it as a whole, even I was surprised when I did the research, and I speak to people like Gabor personally, and and take a lot from all of his research, and you look at it and you're like, why are we even questioning whether there's a problem with our children? The problem is not with our children, it is with their environment. And so we come back to, let's take ADHD, as you say, it's there's no blood test, there's no brain scan. There's a lot of people that I'm also speaking to now, Dr. Lucy Johnston of the Power Threat Meaning Framework. A lot of her work is looking at actually misdiagnosis.
In terms of saying you've got ADHD, but you haven't.
Yes. And actually, Margot Sunderland, who's one of my mentors, child psychotherapist, she's like, all young children have ADHD. Mm-hmm. ADHD is when we find it more difficult to regulate our emotions. So for a lot of children, I think that people are looking and thinking that child's got something wrong with them. Or I've heard some people, teachers have said, oh, that child, they don't speak when I talk to them, or they go under the desk and they might have ASD. And I'm like, well, let's just talk about the fight, flight, freeze response, because that child might go mute because they're absolutely petrified at being asked a question that they don't know the answer to, or they really are so frightened and overwhelmed by being at school that they've gone under the desk because their nervous system, not them, they haven't even thought about it, their nervous system has driven it. There's nothing wrong with that child. So children are children. Now, I also know, and I did the ADHD, I paid to have a test done for me, because I thought, A, it'd be quite interesting, and B, because I have a lot of the symptoms.
I do. I've probably got all the things.
I think most of us, I like to think, what I tend to say is that, look, we are all on a spectrum. And some of us will be brilliant at creative things and our brain is less good at this. Our brains are all wired differently. It doesn't mean to say there's something wrong with us.
The word disorder is the problem here, right?
Yes, I talk a lot with Drop the Disorder. There's a great organisation and they do a lot of work in this regard. I think there's a huge compassion. I know for parents, it is terribly distressing when their children are behaving in ways that they just don't understand. Hopefully with my book, this is what I want to do, is to sort of say, please, let's not look at children as having a problem, but there is something that is distressing them. And once we can get into that, a lot of these big behaviours will disappear. They will disappear. I work with children all the time. They disappear. So, or at least dissipate. So I think coming in, my message really is let's try to lose the labels if we can. I understand that they can help because they can sometimes give us a sense of, okay, so I can put my child in that. But it can be quite debilitating for children then, because people either over expect or don't expect so much of them when these kids are brilliant. Their brains, my brain works brilliantly, but it's not great at accounts. It's absolutely awful. But let's work with our children with what they're brilliant at, for starters. If children are behaving in a dysregulated way, let's not look at it that it's a symptom of ADHD. Let's look at it as a symptom of emotional dysregulation. We can work with that. So there is also a real muddle around children who have experienced trauma. And they are, so for example, we might have a boy, I use an example in the book, a boy who's being bullied and his parents are going through a very acrimonious divorce. It's just an example. Now, he then gets violent in the playground because he's being bullied, so he needs to make himself bigger to fend the bullies off. And he's also thinking that the divorce is his fault. So he's experiencing a huge amount of shame. Now, he then gets diagnosed as ADHD because his actions are very dysregulated. If we stop to ask him what was going on for him right then, what's going on for you right now? What is going on in your world and how are you actually coping? This is the power, threat, meaning framework that Lucy Johnston has created. If we ask him what his story is and understand him, we understand that he's being bullied and he's making himself bigger and punching before he gets punched, and that he's having a really, really traumatic time with his parents' divorce. If we diagnose him with ADHD and maybe put him on medication, are we really helping him? So we're doing our children a great disservice if we're not stopping to look at the reasons why. And until science becomes more advanced, we cannot definitively say that anyone definitively has something called ADHD. It's not even really a medical... It's a description. It's an umbrella term. So I really, really want us all to think very carefully. I get that it can be helpful to have it because it can give us more support, and Lord knows parents do need more support. I get that. So I'm not discriminating. I'm just saying I don't want children out there to be expressing their distress and then just being told it's because they've got ADHD or ASD. I want to know that these children are being seen and heard, and not just put on medication, because very often, and again, I talk about medication in the book, it doesn't help long term. It might help in the short term, but it doesn't help long term. We have the evidence for that. So I really would rather that parents sort of say, okay, well, I'm having a tough time. My child's clearly having a tough time. I need help. Can I have help? Yes, this is how it should be. We all need help and support when we ask for it. But actually, if it's about emotional dysregulation, we can bring our children to the point where we can really get beneath what's driving the behaviour. And very often we'll find that it will dissipate. And I do quote Nadine Burke-Harris in the book, who's this incredible paediatrician in the States. And she said of 100 children that she had been sent, that she was said, these kids have got ADHD, she said only 3 would she consider. And even then she said, but only 3. So we really need to understand what's going on for our children and ask not what's wrong with you, but what's going on for you.